Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us today for a very special session in celebration of Pride Month. We're excited to dive in today's conversation on inclusive entrepreneurship and the realities facing queer businesses in Alberta. But before we jump in, let's kick things off with a quick pulse check. We're launching a short poll to see where everyone is at in their journey when it comes to supporting queer inclusion in business. So the poll here, when it comes to supporting queer inclusion in business, where do you feel like you're on your journey? We've got a few options for you here. Are you part of the community and interested in building inclusive spaces? Are you an ally and looking to learn more? Are you here to learn and better understand the challenges? Or maybe you've never thought about this before in a business context. So we'll let those roll in for a minute here, no pressure. Perfect, we're getting some great answers here. Yeah, we're seeing a lot of people here from the community, but also a lot of people here looking to learn, which we love. Perfect. Yeah. As we hold space for this important dialogue, we also want to take a moment to recognize the lands we're on. So Business Inc. acknowledges and respects that we're on a traditional land, meeting grounds, territories, gathering places, and traveling routes of Treaty 4, 6, 7, 8, and 10, and a home to many First Nations, Métis, and Inuit people. In the spirit of reconciliation, we acknowledge the lands of those who've come before us, reside here now, and in the future. Perfect. Just some housekeeping before we get started here. Make sure to submit your questions using our Q&A feature to ensure they don't get missed. We'll make sure that we wrap those up at the end of our presentation today. After this, our webinar will be available on YouTube. So if you had any friends who missed out, we'll make sure to include that in our follow-up email so you can share that with everybody. And then also closed captions are available. Just click the CC button at the bottom of your Zoom screen to activate them. Without further ado, let's get started. So I'd love to welcome everyone to Beyond the Rainbow, Real Talk on 2SLGBTQI plus business in Alberta. In this session, we'll learn how to support queer entrepreneurs and build inclusive businesses in this free practical webinar for Alberta entrepreneurs. My name is Samantha. I work here as a marketing specialist with BusinessLink. For those of you who don't know, BusinessLink helps small businesses start and succeed. So we provide free advice and programs and resources for Alberta entrepreneurs. Yeah, and without further ado, I'd like to introduce Elli here. We're absolutely thrilled to welcome today's speaker, Elli McDine, Executive Director of Alberta 2S LGBTQIA plus Chamber of Commerce and a passionate changemaker in the Alberta community. But I will pass it over to Elli to get started with the rest of her introduction here.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for inviting me here today. I couldn't be more excited about this. Full disclosure, I'm about 3 weeks into this role as executive director with the Alberta 2S LGBTQI plus Chamber of Commerce. And I share that for two reasons. One is what an amazing time to onboard during Pride Month and to go to all these events and to meet so many people in our community and so many queer-owned and trans-owned businesses. But also to set a little expectation that if I don't know the answer to a question that you're asking, I know I do see Mo here, our board chair. I do see Dean, who's also with the Chamber of Commerce here, and can support if we need, but promise to follow up if we can't find you an answer right away. And so a little bit about the chamber. So on the next slide, what we'll have is the vision here is to build a strong, inclusive, and diverse Alberta economy where 2S LGBTQI plus entrepreneurs and businesses thrive, fostering an ecosystem that advances equitable opportunities for all. This is what attracts me to the job, the advancing equitable opportunities for all. It's what I teach in my entrepreneurial and creativity classes at NAIT. And really, this is just an amazing opportunity to kind of learn from our businesses and just about find ways to best support them. So strong alignment, obviously, with the work of Business Link. And next, we'll go into a little bit about what we're going to be doing throughout this presentation, how I came to this work, why I care about it. I think that's a really critical piece. I go into a lot of detail around being a better ally and creating welcoming workplaces, probably too much for kind of the time that we have for the webinar. So we're going to move pretty quickly through it, but I did want to be able to follow up with these slides and kind of view it as a menu for you to say, hey, I can't do everything all the time, but what are some things that I could activate now? I'm going to go over the unique issues facing the 2SLGBTQI plus community, both in Alberta specifically, and some of the cultural issues that are happening, kind of that are being imported south of the border, as well as some specific things that are attached to the business community. Why inclusive businesses are stronger businesses, and then as well as next steps if you want to support as a 2SLGBTQI owned or allied business. So before we do that, though, I want to go into my life around this, which is interesting, I would say, is most of my personal branding in the last 5 years really has been centered around trans and queer joy. I'm a extremely proud trans woman. I'm a proud queer person in our community. And I talk about it on stage. I've done a documentary about queer and trans joy called Coming Home that's all about my gender transition and kind of me bringing along my family and my friends and my community along with it. I've written articles, including things in like Globe and Mail. I post on social media about the joy of queerness and transness. I'm a founding member of the Queer Joy YEG, which is a group dedicated to building queer and trans celebratory and joyful spaces for folks. But the truth is, this is a rather recent development in my life in the last 5 years. And I still wake up a lot of days and kind of go, how did I get here? How did I move so quickly into this position of really celebrating queer and trans joy? I was born in Macklin, Saskatchewan. And so on the next slide, what you'll see is that's a small town. If it's a population of about 1,200 people, if you know it at all, it's probably because of the World Bunnock Tournament. I'm not going to go into detail on it. I won't do that kind of tourism pitch, but I encourage you to Google it. About an hour south of Lloyd. I was very much in the closet. And so I actually get a little bit defensive when people talk about Alberta in a certain way of maybe not being the most progressive around queerness and trans rights. And there are challenges here for certain. But I know personally that there's a lot of wonderful, kind-hearted, wonderful people in these small towns because I'm from one. That said, I was very much in the closet, and a lot of the people that ask me after I'm done kind of presenting and after I'm doing on stage or I'm in these sessions is, when did you know that you were trans? And the truth is, I knew when I was about 15, but I was in the closet from 15 till about 35. I'll be 40 later in the year in December, so I'm still in my mid 30s. It doesn't count. Um, but I remember I kind of always felt this pressure around being in the closet and not sure kind of how to deal with that. I experienced a lot of anxiety and depression around it and thinking the feelings would just go away until I was working at Nate and I was exploring kind of with my therapist what this might mean. That I clumsily walked into my mentor's office and I finally said to her, I think I might be trans. I think I want to transition. It was a really hard thing. And I think when people, if you go to the next slide, what people think of as coming out is you start in and then you and then you come out and then it's done. And that's kind of how it's presented to us. And it's certainly how I thought that my coming out journey would go. It's a straight line, linear. You start here, you end here. But the truth is, it's a much more kind of circuitous path that kind of folds back on itself, and you sometimes feel really good about it, and sometimes it's really hard and confusing, and your identity can shift over time, and you realize things about your gender, sexuality that after almost 5 years, it looks a little bit more like this. Often it feels like this big jumbled mess that feels a lot less linear than what I've explained. So I want to make three big points. One, coming out is not a one-time thing. The second thing is coming out is not done in isolation. I think this is the most relevant thing for this community because or for the Business Link community, because I want to show that there is a huge role that our entrepreneurs can play and have played in my life. But also that coming out is this joyful, complex, and extremely awkward experience. What I want to do is tell two stories about myself really early on in transition that made a huge difference in our community. And I'm from Edmonton, Alberta. Adara Hair and Body Studio is this really inclusive place where I got my first gender affirming haircut. And I remember booking the appointment for a cut and color and feeling very nervous kind of going in, but very excited about it. And I met with my stylist and I'm showing her photos of what I would like. And I'm really nervous. I can feel myself shaking. And she leans over and pokes one of the photos and said, I think this would look really pretty and I think we should do this. Then, throughout my kind of whole salon experience, I had stylists coming over and asking kind of what I was getting done and really kind of gassing me up. And by the time I left, I actually felt like I can do this. Like I can actually transition. I can be who I authentically feel on the inside, on the outside. Another company, so hugely, and now Jen Story, who's an owner there, is a friend of mine. So it's a really nice end. Another time I was in the middle of COVID and we're still masked and everything. And I'm going to Mod Uncorked, this great consignment shop in the city. And I can't quite I really want this dress that's kind of on this rack. I really want to try it on, but I can't quite get the courage to do so. But I'm grabbing all these other things, and the owner, Lee Moore, as I'm in the actual change room, throws the dress over. She can see that I was really wanting to, and she threw the dress over and she said, I think this would look nice on you and you should try it on. Um, I share this because if you think that these impacts are small, they're huge, especially early on in someone's coming out journey, especially um, when talking about these things with those closest to you can feel really difficult. But being affirmed in the spaces when you go out into the world, into your shops, into these businesses, can make a huge difference. And have such gratitude for the stylists, the makeup artists, the all of the people that really played a role early on in my transition and provided that support. And so just want to kind of provide a little bit of the context of how I come to this work and to really say that you can have a huge, huge impact. So the truth is that there's a lot of challenges right now that are facing the 2SLGBTQI plus community. I'm sure you read about them in the news story, in the news. I'm sure that if you are in the community that you experience it yourself, and if you are allied in that community, if you have family or friends that are, that you're aware of it. I always say if being trans or queer was a choice, I would choose this life every day. But to be honest, it's pretty tough some days. If I look just locally at there's a lot of anti-queer and trans and anti-trans legislation and cultural kind of pushback. Bills 26, 27, and 29 are all kind of, if you go to the next slide, I can show you the some of these things too. Thank you very much. Um, they're all kind of designed in some ways to push trans and queer people kind of to the edges of society. And it's not just the legislation, but it's this kind of cultural over cloud that kind of takes over all of it. So this here is a map of the United States, and it's a do not travel rating for transgender people. So this is the anti-queer and anti-trans spillover that's happening in the United States. These are places where it's unsafe for me to go right now. These are places where for me to travel as a trans woman through these spots, I am actively kind of putting my safety at risk. Now, we are not the US, but a lot of those attitudes, a lot of those things that are kind of in the air are actually infiltrating our our communities. And so there is a role to be played by everyone, including our entrepreneurs, including our businesses, to say that this is not a something that we want to have here, that we want to build an inclusive economy, that we want trans and queer folks to feel safe in our communities. So the real impact, though, is that hate crimes have actually more than doubled since 2019. As of 2024, hate crimes targeting gender identity or expression rose 151% over the last 4 or 5 years, and 37% in 1 year from 22 to 23. Hate crimes based on sexual orientation spiked by 69, totaling 860 incidences. I don't share these as a way of scaremongering, but I just want to kind of underline that the culture that we create, the inclusive practices that we build as businesses, as communities, um, in our families, in our schools, does have an impact on kind of the day-to-day life of queer and trans people. More than that, though, there's also some specific business-related effects to anti-queer and anti-trans attitudes. 55% of 2SLGBTQI plus entrepreneurs say their identity has negatively impacted access to financing. 1 in 5 2SLGBTQI plus entrepreneurs report experiencing discrimination in the business world. More than half of queer entrepreneurs have hidden their identity in business contexts, especially when seeking capital or working with clients. And fewer than 13% have access to SLGBTQI plus specific business support programs. And so the ecosystem funding that was provided by the federal government is meant to address some of these, to build community, to build mentorship. And the work that the chamber does is really advancing that mission, is to say that our queer-owned, our trans-owned businesses need some specific supports to address some of those barriers that they have to bring their creativity, to bring their innovation to the market. Moreover, I just want to say one thing about I just got back from what the Business Summit is in Toronto. So that's like our 2SLGBTQI entrepreneurship and business summit, essentially, kind of with a bunch of kind of entrepreneurs across the country, a bunch of community members, those in the network that are trying to build up queer and trans entrepreneurship. And for every one of these statistics, you hear stories of people doing that, of someone saying, I actually left my partner, my husband, as in a same-sex couple, off of a form because I thought it might influence kind of how I was viewed. I actively withheld in a networking meeting that I had a trans kid because I thought it might impact how I was viewed. These are stories that you hear, and it's kind of sometimes on the edges. It's not always this outright discrimination, but it's this fear that if I share this fact about myself, if I share my authentic self with the world, I will not have the same experience. I will not have the same opportunities as my cis straight colleagues. So, perfect. I'm just looking at this, my time a little bit. So, what I want to talk about here is how you can be a good business ally to the community. Now, what I've done here is thrown the kitchen sink at this. And I don't intend to spend a lot of time on each one of these slides, but I really wanted it to read like a menu that you can take these slides after and that you can apply it in your own business. And I'm going to say this a couple of times. Don't let trying to do everything, saying that if we can't do everything, we're going to do nothing. I present this like a menu to say, what are some small steps that you can take as a business to be more inclusive, to find ways to support the 2SLGBTQI community in a more full-throated way. So with that in mind, let's go through some of these. Couple things you can do, and these are a mix really between kind of the staff part of this, and so as you're growing your business, as you're building your business, also through the how do you kind of communicate that business to your customers? How are you as a part of the broader community? How do you kind of signal that you are a safe place for queer and trans folks? So this one really is about diversifying hiring and leadership pipelines. So that means assessing recruitment sources for inclusion of queer and trans candidates, ensuring the pathways for marginalized communities, and there are solid pathways for those marginalized communities into leadership roles. And a really key one, and it's something that I found in my career is lacking sometimes, is these feedback systems that promote open communication without fear. Recognizing that we're all learning on this process and being open to hearing, hey, when you said this in that meeting, I just want to say I felt erased or I didn't feel seen in that. And to be able to put down our defensiveness and then go, okay, how am I going to kind of shift my behavior, my language going forward? Another one is I love Pride Month. I'm exhausted. I really find I'm sure if there's other queer and trans folks on here are kind of coming to the end of the month and going, I can't wait for July. That's it. I love Pride Month. I think it's such a joyful time in my life, time of my year every year. But I really want to underline that allyship is a year-round commitment, not limited to Pride Month. I'm sure you saw some of the stories out of the Toronto Pride, where Home Depot and Google Canada both pulled their funding in support of that really last minute, which kind of put the committee and the group that hosts that event in a bit of a tough situation. Um, if you're only going to be there for Pride Month, if you're just going to kind of utilize the branding, my feeling in the community, and this is not just representing my voice, but conversations I have, is I don't want it. I don't want you to take advantage of just the Pride Month and not do the allyship kind of year round. Um, Engaging with queer neighbors, business owners, and organizations throughout the year, staying active during 2SLGBTQI plus anti-trans and anti-queer legislation or violence, speaking up, reflecting on ongoing support for the community throughout the year. Another one that's related to this is the idea of using your influence. So I'll just wait for this to catch up. Sorry, it's a little dragged. Thank you very much. Um, this means that advocating for inclusive policies in your company and in your industry, call out discrimination from suppliers, customers, or partners, connecting queer organizations with mainstream business groups, nudge, nudge, 2SLGBTQI plus Chamber of Commerce. We're already connecting with so many amazing um, partnerships throughout the city and the province. And then diversifying your suppliers by working with inclusive providers. We can answer more questions about that too if you have specific questions around how that's done. To demonstrate allyship, invest in clear signage, digital and in-store that signals inclusivity, staff and board training on pronoun use, updating policies for this inclusivity, and critically ensuring that physical spaces and marketing materials are not just accepting of queer and trans individuals. And this is a space where neutrality sends a signal to me as a trans and queer person, um, that if it comes down to my rights as a queer and trans person and someone's discomfort with my presence in that store, that those things are equal, and they're not. So hearing or seeing displaying signs like safer space or we welcome all identities or all gender bathrooms, these are signals that you can say that you belong here. You are a part of our customer base. You are a part of our community, and we want to celebrate that. Another thing internally is reviewing and revising your policies to protect against discrimination based on gender identity, expression, and sexual orientation. Include inclusive language in your employee handbook, using words like partner instead of husband or wife, and assuming that couples are straight. Offering family leave policies for queer and trans family. My favorite bit of advice for this, if you're looking through your policies, is when in doubt, just ask the question, who might feel unseen or unsafe in reviewing this policy, right? Who might feel unseen or unsafe? Related to this, normalized pronoun use and inclusive language. I just saw, I'm not sure if Jay is here, but that Rogers had just kind of made some shifts around kind of with their allowing for pronoun use and inclusive languages in their teams communications. This is small, but it's also really big, including pronouns in your email signature, Zoom names, and business cards, encouraging others to do the same. Um, the number of times I've presented at places which are business centered, and I'm the only one that says, my name is Elli McDine, and I use she, her pronouns. It feels strange when I'm the only one because I'm declaring myself as different. It does create an atmosphere where it's saying, we want everyone to feel welcome. We want our trans and queer colleagues to feel that they can bring their authentic selves to work. This actually expands to use gender neutral terms like partner instead of husband and wife, and everyone instead of ladies and gentlemen. Critically, and I love this one because I feel like sometimes when I'm dealing with folks who are just entering this space that there's such nervousness. And I can feel actually nervousness in some people talking to me. Train your team, train yourself on respectful recovery if mistakes occur. It's okay. I know I'm trans. You know I'm trans. And so if you make a mistake because you just don't have a lot of queer and trans people in your life, focus on that respectful recovery. Don't make it about me that has to kind of own this thing. Just say, I meant he, she. Correct yourself, move on. That respectful recovery is really critical. Last thing, or not quite last thing, promote equity and inclusion. Consider the following actions. Hire a 2SLGBTQI plus educator or DEI consultant for staff training. There are people that are doing this really great work. DEI has come under fire lately. And I think one of the big shames of this is that there are people that are really smart, really creative, really dedicated to delivering value. And as a DEI consultant, if you need support kind of hiring someone who's going to deliver an impactful session for staff, reach out. I'm happy to make that connection. We know people through the chamber that are doing this work day in, day out and have expertise. Integrate equity and inclusion values into onboarding, include queer perspectives in leadership and wellness discussions, and solicit feedback on team safety and respect. The higher up you are in an organization, the more impact you have. I worked at places where everyone else shared their pronouns except the executive. The executive did not. They felt that they're the suppliers that they dealt with maybe not be able to deal with that. That sends a message that it's not for you. That I don't need to do this because I'm worried that this might feel strange for me. I'm not modeling the behavior. So particularly for senior people in their organizations, what you do matters. The language you use matters. It has a huge cascading effect in your organization. Where am I? Sorry, one second. Diversify your hiring practices. Examine job posting locations to ensure they reach queer and trans individuals. Eliminate necessary qualifications that could exclude candidates with non-traditional backgrounds. I'm an educator. I teach at a post-secondary. I'm a big believer in this. I believe in school. I believe in expertise. And I also think more than ever at this point in the economy that holding on to certain qualifications as you need this can create artificial barriers for certain groups. And so if you're only selecting from a group of um, traditional business networking communities, ask yourself who's not here, who's not a part of this conversation. Encourage applications to share pronoun voluntarily and avoid gender assumptions during interviews. Just a huge thing. Okay. Pay fairly and equitably. I know this is challenging. I know I'm a hopeful entrepreneur myself, and I really understand the challenge that we have around here. But um, there's how we signal kind of allyship and how we signal support of the community, and then there's the actions. And one of those things is auditing wage gaps by gender identity or expression. Really understanding kind of where are those gaps in your company and how are you going to address those. Ensuring transparency in pay ranges and job postings to combat wage discrimination against trans and non-binary individuals and other marginalized groups. I'm a big fan of transparency. I think it is a revolutionary thing that we can introduce if we're talking clearly about compensation, talking clearly about pay, and making sure that's done in an equitable way. It could have a huge impact on our communities. Another thing is budgeting for trans and queer affirming benefits like mental health and transition related care. I take hormones regularly um, as a trans woman. It's expensive. Through my transition, I actively seek therapy. I think that's a good thing for everyone to do. But these sort of things allow people to kind of actively choose opportunities that will still allow them to kind of show up as their authentic selves. So budget for that gender affirming benefits like mental health and transition related care when possible. Final thought, and I've said this a couple of times now and I want to reiterate it. Don't let feeling like you have to do everything prevent you from doing anything. Take small, meaningful steps toward being an inclusive, queer, and trans affirming business. Um, I really mean this. And go easy on yourself in terms of making errors. What we want is not perfect allies. We don't want perfect entrepreneurs. What we want is folks leaning in to do the work. And as the executive director of the 2SLGBTQI plus Chamber of Commerce, we, our members, our network are here to support that. So I leave this at the end. So what is the value of building an inclusive business? And now the value of building an inclusive business, I think a lot of those things that I've just talked about are good things to do because they're good things to do. And to me, that would be enough. However, there are huge benefits. There's economic benefits, there's innovation benefits, there's creativity benefits to building an inclusive, psychologically safe, welcoming environment. And the data is very clear about that. In my time when I'm not with the chamber, I actually am submitting my grades today, and then I will be officially done my teaching on my contract and will take a significant break. Um, I teach a lot about the psychology of creativity in organizations. That's kind of my what I was doing kind of before joining the chamber with some overlap now. So the psychology of organizational uh, innovation, of about how do you build that kind of capacity within your team? What is the value of innovation? And of course, we talk a lot in this class about diverse perspectives. And what is the value of having diversity on your team? What is the value in creating inclusive environments? What is the value of having psychological safety and building that into your strategies? So I really like this. So this is Dr. Catherine Phillips, who is a professor at the Columbia Business School. Diversity jolts us into cognitive action in ways that homogeneity simply does not. I love that quote. I think it really captures what we're after here is that our brains are meant to kind of both adapt and or mold to kind of the people in the room, and groupthink's kind of something that is going to happen. But if there's differing perspectives that you're holding at once, what you're going to get is these different ideas. Our brains don't live in isolation. They ping off of each other. So if someone has an idea or a lived experience that is distinct from yours, it can ping something in your brain to say, I wonder if this type of a product or this type of a service would be valuable and allow us to better serve this customer. So having that diversity in that room really does serve kind of a different type of cognitive action. And this is what the data shows, that diverse management teams deliver 19% higher revenues from innovation. That's defined as new products within 3 years. 45% of total revenue in diverse companies comes from innovation compared to just 26% in companies with below average diversity. And I want to say something around that too, because especially now with ChatGPT, with OpenAI, with the general generative AI movement, we are in a time of disruption. If you're feeling like I can't wait for things to slow down, for them to settle a little bit, I hate to tell you, it's not going to happen. We're not going to settle again. Not for at least for a long, long, long period of time. And so the things that you were doing last year may not work this year. And so the more that you can be in that innovation space and constantly asking, how do I best serve my customers? How do I create innovative new products? You're more likely to exist as a company a year later. And you can see that through the S&P 500 about the turnover of how often kind of companies are dying. It's just speeding up, speeding up, speeding up. How Boston, what is this? Inclusive companies are 1.7 times more likely to be innovation leaders, excuse me for the spelling mistakes there, and 1.8% times more likely to be change ready. These are real things. And so it's not just the idea of you doing the right thing. It is also the idea that this is a strategic decision that you can make as an organization to really invest in the core of like a transformation mindset. And diversity, inclusion, and equity are really important and really critical as a part of that. Why inclusive businesses are stronger businesses? We found that through Gartner, Gallup, Harvard Business Review, the benefits of high psychological safety at work are really clear. And we can talk about the data, 27% reduction in turnover, 50% more productivity, 74% less stress, 26% greater skills preparedness since workers learn at a faster rate when they're feeling safe. We know this because we feel it. 67% high probability that workers will apply a newly learned skill on the job. The thing about these numbers, just going back to that really quickly, we feel that. One of my favorite exercises I do is, or I've done it kind of a couple of times now, is a networking thing where you say, okay, take write down on a piece of paper the 5 most important facts about you, right? And mine is I'm a parent to 2 kids. I'm a open and celebratory queer and trans person. Um, I'm in my community. I'm active socially in my community through these sort of through these sort of causes and these sort of things. I'm a creative person. Those 5 things that are the most important. And then we ask people to say, okay, now have a conversation with the person next to you, but don't mention those 5 things. It's really hard to have a conversation where you can't be your authentic self. And part of that is the psychological safety that you can be honest when things are hard. You can be honest when you're struggling. You can be honest when a particular task feels like you actually aren't connecting to it. Um, that's all tied to that psychological safety at work. So investing in those things are not bonuses, they're not ads. They're actually a strategic way of actually creating the conditions for creativity in your business. If you're going to read anything around the value of diversity and inclusion, the value of the value of inclusive business, this article is great. It is over 10 years old now, so some of the data is older, but I love this. How diversity makes us smarter. So this is Dr. Phillips shared results from a meta-analysis and field studies across organizational, psychological, and sociological studies, reviewing data from 1992 to 2006, as well as looking at cross-industry findings. Here's what they found. Diverse groups work harder, smarter, and more creatively. Social diversity increases diligence, problem solving, and innovation. Exposure alters thinking. Being around diverse peers shifts how you approach problems and seek novel information. Rich perspectives equal better decisions. Gender and ethnic diversity in leadership correlates with more open-minded, more thorough, more detailed decision making. And objective improvements in outcomes, including diverse teams produce higher impact work. For example, like papers in an academic setting with more citations, and they outperform economically homogeneous teams. The evidence is clear, and there's a lot of challenges that we can have around the EDI kind of ecosystem. And like everything else, it's worth interrogating how we do something better. But the value is clear that diversity is an economic strength. I've never been more certain of it looking at the data than I am into this topic. So we have a couple minutes left. What I want to talk about is there's lots of ways that we can support or that we can kind of better support our queer and trans allied businesses. I'm going to use this time to talk a lot about kind of the 2SLGBTQI plus Chamber of Commerce. And after a few weeks and reading things kind of through the interview process and those things, the value that I see is in these 3 buckets. You get community, you get opportunities for growth, and you get visibility. So through community, if you join the charter, we are going to join as a vibrant, queer-focused business community of entrepreneurs, professionals, and allies across Alberta. You access exclusive networking events, mentorship programs. These are specifically designed to foster meaningful connection and shared growth. We collaborate and amplify impact by volunteering on committees, coming to events, where we're shaping that community while gaining really interesting leadership experience. So just the access to the network alone is really, really, really exciting. And again, on the growth side of this, there's tools, mentorship, and resources that are built for your success. And it's not just through the Alberta 2SLGBTQI plus Chamber of Commerce, but our connections to the Canadian 2SLGBTQI plus Chamber of Commerce, which has ways of indicating that you are doing the work and that you are diversifying your suppliers and that you are finding ways of working within the communities that are most impacted by that you can have the most impact in. So things like workshops, webinars, resources focused on overcoming the unique challenges that face queer and trans entrepreneurs, mentorship pathways, supplier diversification, supplier diversity certification. You can get certified, and allowing you to kind of for discounted certification with members, kind of access to corporate and government procurement opportunities that are specific for those groups. And then visibility. You're being seen, you're being heard, and you're valued in Alberta's business landscape. Featured in the Chamber's director and local communications to raise visibility among clients, peers, and procurement networks. You're amplifying your voice in provincial advocacy initiatives. You're aligning yourself with values that you share with other businesses and other communities and other organizations. So we can stand together to say the future of Alberta is an inclusive future. It is an inclusive economic future that we're trying to build. You gain marketing support through chamber channels, plus opportunities to to promote your brand at events through community spotlights. There's lots of ways that we can do this that you can kind of gain from membership with the 2SLGBTQI plus Chamber of Commerce. Other things that you can do that are not tied to the chamber is because I don't want to just limit it to kind of that activity, but doing things like showing up to events, questioning when there's networking events where it's not designed to be gender inclusive of gender and sexual identities, a different set of gender and sexual identities. Um, Advocating inside of your company, finding ways to support each other, right? Other queer-owned businesses. I love that that's through the Chamber of Commerce, but just finding ways to uplift each other is a really crucial thing. One of the great joys of my experience in the first few weeks has been meeting companies like Kind, like Evo Wonder Lounge, like Delavoi Chocolate in Edmonton, um, all sorts of businesses that are a part of our network, and hearing about Better Belonging, this consulting group that does amazing work within the community around kind of building some of these practices that we're talking about. These folks are really kind of building an inclusive Alberta economy. And through joining the chamber, what you'll get is a chance to kind of be a part of that movement, to work together, to find ways to support each other, because these are challenging things to kind of work through. With that said, um, if you are a queer-owned, queer celebratory, or allied business trying to better support the 2SLGBTQI plus community, I want to know what sort of support you wish you had. And I want you to be honest about this, of whether it's navigating politics at work, navigating different identities kind of around and different attitudes related to gender diversity and sexual diversity. And so what I'm going to do is we'll pop that survey into the chat. I'll also give a space, for you to reply, give your email. I'll follow up. I'm happy to have a coffee or meet for a beverage to talk about kind of how the chamber can support, how I personally can help, these sort of things. Thank you very much. I think we're good, if I'm not mistaken, on time, which is remarkable. I really jammed in a lot of content there, so thank you very much. Um, but I just want to say thank you very much. This is such a warm welcome to this position, and I actually know a lot of the folks that are going to be attending this presentation. And just the warm welcome that I received actually made me tear up this week. So thank you, Samantha. Thank you, Amy. And thank you to the folks who listened.
Yeah, we want to thank you so much, Elli, for joining us today, and also congratulate you on your new role. We're sure you're going to do amazing, brilliant things with the Chamber. Thank you for going over these topics today, for sharing your personal story too as well. I know it takes a lot to be out there, and yeah, and I related to a lot of things as well, so it was very touching. Now, I did want to, just before we get into the Q&A here, just remind people to pop their questions into our Q&A function, and we're going to get to those in a second here. I also wanted to quickly say, while the chamber offers amazing resources, so everyone should be checking those out, and those will be sent in a follow-up email as well. So no need to go and rush and do a survey right now. We will have that provided to you after. Perfect. There we go. Okay, and then are you ready to get into the Q&A, Ellie?
I'm ready. I'm well versed in the diverse Q&A. So please ask any question that you'd like. I'm open.
Okay, sounds good. So our first question is from an anonymous attendee. So this actually is something I think most people will like to know about. So please advise in a letter, how do we address someone when we don't use know one's pronouns?
Uh, Great question. I'm like meaning kind of like dear Mrs. McDine, but you don't know that I am Mrs.
Yeah,
McDine.
that's exactly what they're asking.
Um, where possible, default to gender neutral pronouns. And so until someone corrects you, because it's an assumption that it's like you're based on kind of physical characteristics or name or those sort of things. I know that the instead of Mr. or Mrs., MX is kind of the gender neutral salutation, essentially. So mix McDine if I was a non-binary individual that used they them pronouns. Um, the other thing you can do is reach out and ask if there's a way of kind of asking about that, collecting that information first. Like data collection is like a really big thing. And so asking explicitly for pronouns, um, and asking for kind of any sort of salutations or greetings that are kind of feel most comfortable. Um,
Yeah, and I also would like to add on to that briefly as well. So, if you're for, because we are in a business context here, if you were applying for a job or a grant and you didn't know who was going to, instead of saying for like to sir or madam, you can always go and say to whom it may concern. That's gender neutral as well.
yeah, there's
All
lots of
right.
things. There's also a lot of resources online. If you pop that exact question into Google, you'll find kind of I know um, that'll kind of say in this situation, try this kind of thing. So instead of sir or madam, try this salutation. Yeah.
Yeah. And that's also, using AI too. Chat's always a good editor.
Yeah. Yeah, I one of the ways I actually use it is I teach a in entrepreneurship course like I was talking about is I built how do I do more universal learning, apply more universal learning design principles to my work. And another one is, wow, this is like a lot of men in tech examples. Can you give me some examples that aren't that? Or hey, this letter that I've actually crafted feels biased. Can you show me kind of where I might kind of be able to improve this to make it less Eurocentric, less male centric, less whatever it is. Yeah, that's a great
Yeah,
idea, Samantha.
that's great. Um, okay, and then our next question here, which I think actually I've heard this one quite often. So this question asker notices that some people use three pronouns when they are putting out their pronouns. So she, her, and hers. What does the three mean when we are using two today?
Uh, I think just preference, and it was also just like I don't know, Samantha, maybe you have an idea about this, but my understanding is just like either what was said previously, like the first note, if someone says she, her, and hers, it's just more detail, right? If I put she
Yeah,
and her, I assume that when you go, whose bag is that? You say it's hers, and you point to me, that you'll apply kind of that logic. So, nope, there's no, I don't know. I don't see any kind of, I think it's just kind of differences in kind of presentation.
yeah, I think it's just that extra step of detail, especially, you never know for people's level of English as well. So it
Yeah.
depends on what field you're in and the circumstances as well. So, at the bottom of an email, like it might be more appropriate to add that third one. But here today, because we don't want to take up the entire screen, we have two pronouns.
Yeah. Yeah.
Perfect. And now getting a bit more into the business questions. What kind of benefits should an employer offer that they do not offer yet to support queer people?
I mean, I'll start with the base, which is like uh, gender and trans inclusive healthcare. I know that's challenging in some places, but I also know places like Blue Cross Alberta are exploring kind of, and I think they actually have products that are related to that, that are more publicly um, that are designed with queer and trans people in mind. And so exploring those options and not kind of assuming what their staff looks like, but also kind of understanding that their health needs are going to be distinct. Other benefits include like just speaking beyond just the gender and sexual diversity, but as allowing like floating holidays too, as opposed to kind of like religious denoted holidays is like a really big thing. And so like we do like a holiday closure of sorts within the chamber. Um, and that's great, but it's like we want to make sure that my staff has access if they don't celebrate Christian holidays, or if they celebrate some other holidays, or if they want that time kind of to do something else, that there's inclusion that way as well, that there's not kind of as much prescription around what days. What other benefits? Training. I mean, like a huge part of it that I would like to, this is not just a queer and trans thing, but um, growth. Growth in your career and like who has access to those things. I hear a lot from, and something I've noticed as a trans woman is that I I feel a limit on on within certain places, like a career limit, because I'm just out of circles, not being a man. And so finding ways to kind of actually make explicit leadership pipelines and mentorship pipelines and saying, hey, I want to expose you as a director. I want to expose you as my staff to my work as a director because I see that you could also do this role, but that I don't want to just choose people that look like me and then kind of have that go, well, that's the best person for the job, kind of that does that. If that's not made explicit, if those mentorship opportunities aren't made explicit, if some of those leadership pathways aren't made explicit, um, it just reinforces a lot of the existing biases that exist in our society. Samantha, do you have anything else?
To tack on to that there, or questions, sorry.
No, no, anything to tack on for benefits like
Yeah, I think actually I wanted to circle back on your point a little bit about the vacations, like having a little bit of flexibility in there too. I think something that is really through my time working with other queer organizations was that when you're working with your queer employees, there is kind of a bit of a more sensitivity around family because you don't super know people's family relationships, and that's beyond everybody. So
Mhm.
when you're using that wording around holidays and stuff and letting them be flexible, you might not. Some people might not want to. These traditionally family holidays might be like phrased differently and all that kind of wording as well. But I think you kind of knocked it out of the park with benefits in general there.
I will say one more thing on this is it really depends on what your specific business is. And um, if you are hearing nothing, if you're saying, we're a very inclusive workplace and we don't ever hear anything, um, you might be, and it might just be perfect, but there's also a good chance that there isn't the listening. They don't feel safe necessarily to kind of speak up around that. And that's speaking from experience in my own, of like, there isn't the invitation to share. And so if you want to know more about kind of what are the benefits or what are the ways in which we could become more inclusive around this, whether it's benefits or something else, um, as a leader walking the walk and saying, I want to know this. I want to know the hard stuff. And I challenge myself with that all the time in areas that aren't like queer and trans related, where how do we make other marginalized groups feel comfortable? Because I know I have blind spots. And so part of the practice is to be open to that kind of feedback and saying,
Yeah.
when you said this or when this happened on my onboarding process, this didn't feel good. And then managing my own defensiveness to say, I'm an ally, I'm trying to do this. It's like, no, no, I'm learning. Like everyone else, I'm learning how I can kind of create diverse, equitable um, um, teams that actually feel safe to kind of share their experience.
Yeah. So I think just hearing from that, I think one of those things is be open to questions and, be open to possibly even, if you feel like your staff is uncomfortable around you,
Yeah.
using those outside resources, like you had talked about consultants and stuff earlier as
Hmm.
well, like bringing those people into your organization can also really be helpful.
Hmm.
In the sake of time, I'm going to get us to another presentation
Yeah.
here, another question here. Um, so other than a diversity statement at the bottom of a job description, how can companies indicate they're inclusive and inclusiveness and recruit queer/diverse talent in the recruitment process?
Again, I'm happy to follow up on resources. This feels like a big question, and one in which you could use AI to kind of like challenge, pretend you are an EDI kind of consultant and challenge this thing and show where there's kind of improvements that can be made. If you go throughout it, you can kind of like there's things that are being communicated directly, and then there are um, things that what is left out. You know what I mean? There's like a vibe, from lack of a better description, of kind of the job description you're looking at. Um, and so again, asking yourself as you're reading this job description, um, who doesn't feel seen or safe applying for this job? And it can be as simple as like I'll use an example. Like I'm an active mom, I'm an active parent around this. Um, I have like whenever there's someone like, an expectation of being on all the time or something like that, I have to drop my kids at school. I sometimes have to pick them up when they're sick. That's finding ways in which you can balance kind of the needs of the job that need to be done, while also saying it's like we don't want this to just be um, single men that are applying for
Yeah,
this job. Dress codes is a good example of that too. It's like I understand the desire for some of those things, but really it's a careful thing to walk, because you want someone to actually feel like they can show up as themselves. And that may not mean sweatpants, but they may mean like um, not having gender dress codes and those sort of things of like, don't say men wear pants and women wear dresses. Like it seems obvious, but you do encounter that kind of thing in job descriptions and in dress codes and in certain those sort of policies.
yeah, I think really on that as well is just reviewing, especially if you are in an organization or you own a business that's a bit older and has been around for a long time, going and making sure that you're not just reusing content like job descriptions, that you actually are actively reviewing.
On that note too, I mean, bringing people into that conversation, like it's hard. I feel like I'm answering these too vaguely, but if I'm looking around the table and we're going, how do we make our job postings more diverse, friendly, and more inclusive? And it's someone that looks exactly like me times eight, and it's like
Yeah,
eight men or eight women, whatever it is. Um, that's not sufficient. Like, I mean, like bringing people into the conversation to allow them to go, gosh, that doesn't capture my experience. That makes me go, I want to select out. And that's hard as a senior leader sometimes, because you're adding more work, but it's necessary actually to do this kind of to build an inclusive core, is to have people around the table that are making leadership decisions.
yeah, that's so important, right? We're kind of running out of time here, but I'm going to wrap up with one question that I think you can answer quickly. That's really
Sure.
so. As a transgender owned brick and mortar retail business in Calgary, we are struggling due to the economic impact of tariffs and general downturn and are in danger of having to close our business. I have explored government grants both federally and provincially and have not been able to find any specific grants catered um, to queer owned businesses. Are these resources available? And if so, can I find a directory?
What I would actually ask is, that feels like a longer conversation that I would love to engage in, and not just as a sales pitch for the chamber, but just to like understand kind of some of the specifics they're looking for. My email is a part of this, right?
Yes, it will be.
Okay,
We
if
can share it.
person that left that can just send me a quick note, just say, hey, I'm the person that asked that question. I'm going to book us time, and we can kind of chat through some of those things and some of the resources that are available.
Yeah, I think that's a great way to end it here. Is that the chamber is there to answer your questions and help you. Um, Now, I'll do a little shameless plug as well. If you have any other non-queer business related questions, you can always ask Business Link. That is what we're here for. But I think I'm just going to thank you again for your time before we wrap up here today. Um, and also thank everybody else for joining us and for all your thoughtful questions. I don't think we got through everything, but you're always welcome to follow up with a question. And from the Business Link email, we can forward it to Ellie and her team as well. Now, before everyone leaves, there's a QR code here on the screen. Feel free to scan there to sign up for our newsletter. That's where you're going to hear about all our future events, our blogs, our resources, and our programs at BusinessLink. Um, And we also are going to have a survey pop up here. And if you could complete that after the session, your feedback will really help us improve. Yeah, thank you so much.
Thank you so much. What a joy this was.
Yeah, this is great. Okay, bye everyone.